So the last section here is conserving agricultural resources. And so we've talked a lot about why this might be necessary, and the things that are happening on the planet with our agriculture and why we need to worry about making our practices sustainable. So we are facing challenges with each of the key resources that we need for agriculture: soil, water, nutrients, and pollinators. We didn't talk much about nutrients and pollinators, but we talked a lot about soil and water, and so we're facing challenges with each of these. So if we're going to continue to feed the growing population, we need to either modify our diets or increase our agricultural production. And so it's really important that we also be sure to not degrade these resources. So we can't just degrade these resources and move to new areas, because that will promote turning grasslands into deserts. It will remove ecologically precious forests, and they're super important because they're biodiversity. We would encourage invasive species. We would pollute the air, the soil, the water with toxic chemicals, and we would, through erosion, allow fertile soil to be blown away. So we have to be careful. So resource conservation is the only sustainable solution to our agricultural needs. Basically, we just have to start conserving. So one of the things that we're facing is land degradation. And land degradation is the deterioration of land that diminishes its productivity and biodiversity and impairs its functioning of its ecosystems, impairs the functioning of its ecosystem services. So basically, we're making it less productive. This will lead to soil erosion, nutrient depletion, water scarcity, and pollution. Because each year we gain about more than 80 million people on the planet, but we lose 12 to 17 million acres of productive cropland to land degradation. And it's caused by the cumulative impacts of unsustainable agriculture, deforestation, and urban development. So basically, we are not growing food sustainably. We're building new cities. Basically, we're just losing this productive land. And a subset of that is soil degradation. So this is the deterioration in quality and productivity of soil. And it's caused by forest removal, cropland agriculture, and overgrazing of livestock. So we're going to talk about a lot of those three things. And soil degradation has reduced potential food production by 13% on cropland and 4% on rangeland. So rangeland being where the grazing of livestock are. So combined with the fact that we're losing our productive land and that our population is growing, it's a really big problem. One of the big problems is erosion, and erosion by definition is the removal of material from one place and its transport to another by wind or water. And so this is and the vice versa, the opposite of this is that when these eroded materials are either blown away or swept away in the water, they get left at new locations, and that's called deposition. So erosion leads to deposition. And these are both natural processes. They're both ecosystem services. But while they can be good, in the long run, deposition helps to create new soil because the new soil can be left with nutrients. The flowing water can bring new nutrients to new places. It's by its process a good thing, but it's happening at a super accelerated rate due to agriculture. So we're losing topsoil at a really fast rate, and topsoil is the most important horizon for growing food and for life. And we're losing nutrients in the soil and organic matter. And so it becomes a problem when soil is eroded more quickly than it forms. And a lot of times the nutrients are being carried out to sea when erosion is happening, and that's not helping us because we're not trying to grow things at sea. So areas that are sloped, windy, have intense precipitation, or sparse vegetative cover are the most at risk for erosion, because if it's windy, there's more wind to blow the dirt away. If they're sloped, it's easier for wind or water to wash the sediment away. If there's intense precipitation, there's more water for erosion. And if there's sparse vegetative cover, then it's more likely that the wind can get down in there and blow the dirt away. And people have made the land more vulnerable to erosion in three ways. So one of them is over-cultivating fields through poor planning or excessive tilling. Tilling is the process where you basically plow the dirt, so you turn it over. And so that has led to more erosion. grazing rangeland with more livestock than it supports. So basically, if there's more cows eating the grass than is available for the grass to grow back, that is making it more vulnerable to erosion. And then clearing forests on steep slopes. So now if we remove the forest on a steep slope, now all that dirt is just going to flow right down as soon as there's any water or wind. And one study has shown that U.S. croplands lose about 1 inch of topsoil every 15 to 30 years, and that is a very big amount. And this is happening across the world too. It's become a global issue. Oh, so more than 19 billion hectares, and a hectare is bigger than it's a very large unit of land. Of the world's croplands suffer from erosion and soil degradation. And so they did a study that there were 2 studies done by 2 different men in 2 different times that show that there is at least 10 times more erosion due from human activities compared to all other natural causes combined. So here is the mean erosion rate of conventional agriculture. So if we change to conservation tilling, which we'll see in a minute, it's a lot lower. The native vegetation only has a mean erosion rate of about 0.05, and then the Earth's average is 0.17. So this almost 0.4 is very high. So that's erosion. Then we'll talk about desertification and what desertification is reduced productivity of arid lands. Arid meaning dry. And this is actually where most of the world's population lives, is in these dry lands, and they cover about 40% of the Earth's surface. And these dry lands are prone to desertification, where it's a type of land degradation where more than 10% of productivity is lost. And so wind and water erosion are the biggest causes of desertification. So it can expand existing desert and create new desert areas, and it endangers the food supply or well-being of more than 1 billion people on the planet. Your book even says that China loses about $6.5 billion annually due to desertification. And here's an example of it. This is the Gobi Desert in China. And basically the deserts are expanding and burying villages, destroying agricultural land, and forcing farmers and ranchers to overuse lower quality land. So basically, as these people are forced out of their places where they have been farming and raising livestock for forever, now they're forced onto lower quality land, which leads to more erosion and more land degradation. So this is a positive feedback loop happening here with the desertification. And so it's actually expected to get worse as climate change leads to increased temperatures and increased dryness in particular areas. The desertification is expected to continue. This has led to some giant dust storms. And so we're actually going to talk about the Dust Bowl and how the Dust Bowl in the late 19th and early 20th centuries prompted the U.S. to fight erosion because it became such a problem. So for a long time, there in the U.S. before large-scale agriculture took over, the grasses in the native grasslands held the soil in place and kept it fertile. But then we started cultivating crops there and plowing up the native grasslands. And so we started the land degradation by cultivating more crops. And then in the 1930s, there was a severe drought. And so that really worsened the impact and caused the region's strong winds to erode millions of tons of topsoil. And it generated these massive dust storms and created what was called the Dust Bowl. So some of the most affected regions lost 10 centimeters or 4 inches of topsoil in just a few years. So that is a significant amount, 4 inches of topsoil gone in a few years. And so this is the region where the Dust Bowl was, but there were blackened snow and rain as far east as New York City and Washington, D.C. because of this, because of the massive dust storms that happened. And because of this, thousands of farmers in this area were forced off of their land. And so this led to the Soil Conservation Act in 1935. Which created the Soil Conservation Service, which was an agency that worked with farmers to combat erosion. And so they used science to assess land resources and problems, and they collaborated with landowners to make sure the landowners' needs were met as well as conserving or preventing erosion. And so it was teams of soil scientists, forestry experts, engineers, economists, biologists, And it was the first interdisciplinary environmental problem solving. So all these different people came together to come up with a way to solve the erosion problem that was based in science that would also help the farmers as well. Now today, since 1994, it's been known as the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And basically, there are these people who are trained scientists who work as extension agents, and they help farmers to make sure that we are conserving our land or conserving our soil. And there are a number of ways that we can conserve our soil. A lot of these have come into place since the Dust Bowl to alleviate soil degradation. So one of them is called crop rotation, and this is the practice of when you plant one crop for a season and then the next season you grow a different crop to ensure the sustainability of the soil. One of the good ways to do this is if you alternate planting legumes like soybeans or I don't know any other kind of beans, legumes, but or peanuts or legumes. But basically, these legumes they have that relationship with the bacteria on their roots to fix nitrogen. And so by growing legumes, they're boosting soil nitrogen, so we don't need as much fertilizers and keeping the soil full of nutrients. And crop rotation also breaks pest and disease cycles that they often see in continuous planting. If you plant the same thing over and over again, then the bugs or the pests that live there will continue to live there because they have a continuous source of food, and there can also be disease breakouts amongst the plants. So if you switch the plants that you're growing every season, then that doesn't become as much of a problem. It also prevents erosion because a lot of times farmers they would grow something one season and nothing the next and wait to grow the same crop the following season. And by leaving the land unplanted, it would lead to more erosion. So it prevents that erosion from unplanted land. Another thing is called contour plowing, and this happens they do this when you plant on a hillside, and that is because water is the most dangerous to erosion when it flows downhill because gravity will pull it downhill and pull the sediment with it. So contour plowing is when they will plow sideways across a hillside, as you can see in this picture. So it kind of creates these flat basins for farmers to plant in, these little furrows. They run perpendicular to the hill slope, so they kind of work as a small dam to stop the river flow. Here they would grow things that grow well in rows because they're going to grow in rows. And so that way they can prevent the water from flowing downward and away from the plants and creating erosion. And then another idea is called terracing, but this happens on very steep terrain. It's seen often it's been done for hundreds of years in the Himalayas and Andes, very steep mountains, and so what they do is they create level platforms that prevents the water from flowing downhill. And it's basically the only sustainable way to perform agriculture on a mountainous terrain. Then we also have what's called intercropping, and intercropping is when you would plant several different plants at the same time on the same plot of land. So you might plant, I'm not sure what kind of crops these are, but there's one kind here, and then a separate crop here, and another one there. And so the reason for this is that they're keeping the soil fertile by growing many different things. So they may be planting legumes to restore nitrogen to the soil, or maybe they're planting what's called cover crops, like tall trees, to reduce wind erosion. So if the wind can't get down to the dirt, then it's not blowing away. So by doing that, they are maintaining the possibility of having a harvest, still growing a lot of things while preventing erosion and soil degradation. We also have what are called shelter belts, which are when you may plant rows of trees or shrubs that serve as windbreaks. So by planting these rows of tall plants, it's going to prevent wind from sweeping through. It's kind of like how if you're outside and you go behind a building, the wind doesn't get you as much if it's a windy day. So it just breaks the wind from there. And then something that they've done to be productive while still having shelter belts is that they can plant trees that will produce fruit to harvest or provide habitats for animals. Then we also have what's called conservation tillage, which is when we are not going to be tilling or overturning the land as much. And that is because when we do that, we remove the plant matter and leaves the soil surface bare and exposed to wind. And then there's a kind of farming called no-till farming that eliminates tilling altogether. So basically they leave this crop residue behind all year, keeping the soil covered with plant material year round. Or farmers may actually plant things intentionally like this called cover crops to prevent erosion when the main crop is not growing.